am the Chief Innovation Officer at SJN. I just wanted to explain a little bit about our philosophy. We basically are a journalism support organization, and we work with newsrooms, journalism educators, as well as freelancers to talk about the responses to problems, specifically focus on an evidence-based approach. The Insights Lab is an initiative I lead that uses that same framework for social innovations and nonprofits, as well as for philanthropies. So we're like the research unit at SJN. So you'll see a lot of my questions here today will be specifically focused on insights to scale, on solutions that we can take away, and really moving into that mindset. So let me just introduce everybody here. I have Alicia McHale. She's a business systems analyst at Zenify. She, faced with unemployment and the loss of her grandfather at the onset of COVID, she redefined her career trajectory by joining Merit America's digital upskill program. So this is a great way for us to connect the dots amongst the panelists. This is kind of awesome. You rarely see a panel where you have the people who founded an organization and the people who've actually gone through it. Between October and December of 2020, she reskilled along 20 of the most highly motivated candidates in her region that has been displaced in their careers. She completed a Google IT support certification and with the help of her job coach, secured an apprenticeship at Zenify. So we'll talk a lot about that. Following that apprenticeship, she ascended to her current role where she now plays a pivotal part in developing and refining business processes, coordinating integrations, and delivering strategic solutions within the Salesforce DevOps team. That's amazing. Even if it just said Salesforce, I would have been like, that's very impressive. I work with Salesforce, and that's very overwhelming. Tony Emerson Zatina is the program director at the Crankstart Foundation, which is a family fund based in San Francisco. The Crankstart Foundation is one of the funders for Merit America, so we're seeing like the whole ecosystem approach here. His career is focused on mobility for low-income communities through education, workforce development, and philanthropy. At the fund, he leads a dedicated team working to expand programs linking educational attainment to economic uplift. And we'll get more details on that later. His journey began in K-12 education, where he served as a teacher, coach, and recruiter before transitioning to philanthropy. He served on the boards of Hope Chicago and Spark San Francisco Public Schools. He's originally from the Pacific Northwest, from Seattle.
Eugene, Oregon.
Eugene, Oregon. My brother-in-law lives in Eugene, Oregon.
Okay, next time.
He lives in Corvallis.
Great, that's close.
Yeah, it's very close.
Great.
That's awesome. Tony now proudly calls the Bay Area home. He holds a doctorate in educational leadership from the Harvard Graduate School of Education and a bachelor's degree from Gonzaga. That's awesome.
We've got a few plants here.
Yeah, it's a lot of deep fan base over here on this side of the audience.
Yeah.
Alicia McHale is a Rebecca Tabor-Stalen is a co-founder and co-CEO of Merit America, one of America's fastest growing nonprofits tackling economic inequity by creating pathways to well-paying careers for individuals without college degrees. Do you say economic inequality or economic inequity?
Inequality.
I want to talk about the difference between those two terms. Prior to co-founding Merit America, Rebecca built and led Coursera's government and nonprofit team and served as the education advisor to Governor Markle, who is the governor of Delaware, chief performance officer at the Delaware Department of Education, and consultant at McKinsey. She received her BA in political science from Yale and an MBA and MA in education from Stanford, and was appointed in 2023 to the Maryland Higher Education Commission. That's very impressive. That's cool. I don't read any of this stuff before I come to here, so this is all like news to me. So yeah, let's sort of kick off. I would love to hear about specifically the trajectory of Merit America, how it came into being, what the needs were, how you then got involved, Alicia, with the program, and then of course Tony, how you also got involved. So maybe like how is this system connected to each other?
Awesome. Well, it's great to be here. This is a fun, small group, so hopefully this will be conversational. But our story starts in many ways over a decade ago, my personal story, in a room like this. I was working for the governor of Delaware on education policy. We were doing a road show Halloween week a decade ago, talking about all of our great K-12 education reform, how we were getting more folks taking advanced coursework, applying to college, and going to college, all of that great college readiness work. And someone in the audience, just like this, stood up and said, this is all great, but I tried college. I had to leave because I couldn't afford it, couldn't balance work and family. I'm now making $25,000 a year, working in a dead-end job, struggling to make ends meet for myself and my young kids. What are you doing for the people like me? And there was a long pause, and we said, let's tell you about our early childhood education programs for your kids. Because for so long across our country, we were not unique. We haven't had an answer for what we do for folks once they have been failed by the system. Once they've gone through K-12, they've tried college, they've landed in a job with debt and no degree, our answer has been, well, let's do better by the next generation. And so what we're trying to do at Merit America is to build that answer, to build a pathway for the 53 million Americans who are stuck in low-wage jobs, where without quitting their jobs, they can get the skills and coaching they need to make a major life transformation. We are 7.5 years old. We've worked with 15,000 folks, driven approximately $1 billion in wage gains, and we're learning a lot about what it will take to solve this problem at scale. And most importantly, and what I'd love to hear from you all, how we can go from programs like Merit America being an alternative when the system has failed you to a mainstream pathway to the middle class and beyond.
So, Alicia, can you sort of break this down for me from how it affects, like, from the personal level, what this actually looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I can speak to my experience. I got my start with Merit America during the pandemic. My kids were sent home. I remember it vividly because we were at Disneyland and my son was licking the railings in the line. And we were lightheartedly joking about, there's something going around. We don't know what it is, but you need to stop doing that. But we all received the text from our kids' school that they were being sent home to distant learn. And so my husband and I went home and we had a hard conversation about who would be staying home with the kids and who would continue working. I was a mortuary assistant at the time. My husband worked for a grocery store and he had really good benefits. So I was the obvious person. And I was excited to stay home and teach my kids. So I came up with schedules and we did virtual yoga and, kept safe from the world around us. But that was also very isolating and very hard because I was solely reliant on my husband's income. I knew that something wasn't working in all of the college courses that I had taken previous to Merit America. I knew my current job wasn't working, that I was pursuing. So I was happy to put it aside and focus on my kids. But it didn't give me any more clarity about what I would do after the pandemic. And I would just cry myself to sleep at night thinking, I don't know what I'm going to do, but I want more for myself and I want more for my kids. And I don't know how to obtain that. So we were watching the news, my daughter and we heard about a federally funded program. It was a partnership between Merit America and the Sacramento Economic Council. And they were covering tuition. So they were offering us the chance to earn our Google IT support certificate and provide laptops that were ours to keep, which was important because we didn't have a laptop at the time besides my daughter's Chromebook, and $600 weekly stipends so that I could have money for myself to allocate the way I saw fit. And I applied, didn't think that I was going to get in by any means. But luckily, I was interviewed and accepted. Out of the whole Sacramento region, only 20 people were selected for this program. And I entered the program along 20 other highly motivated individuals displaced by COVID. And we earned our Google IT support certificate, but we did so much more than that. I had no clue what LinkedIn was. I didn't know how to tailor a resume. I hated cover letters, didn't know what they were for. And my job coach, Marissa Schuler, she was such a support system for me. So I like to think that Merit America doesn't just give the skills that a candidate needs to land a job, but also the confidence and the support system that is critical for landing a job. We use Slack, we use LinkedIn. We learned about, how to communicate professionally and network, the power of a network. And by Christmas, I earned my Google IT support certificate. And through partner employers like Zenify, a Salesforce consulting firm, I got my first formal job offer on New Year's Eve. And so it was a beautiful moment that my husband and I got to celebrate together with this new career on the horizon. And from there, my partner employer, Zenify, took over my learning and really, I upskilled in Salesforce, got my admin certificate, and was staffed on a nonprofit program for women and children in my area, and then after that, a financial client. And I've been there ever since, learning, how to bridge the gap between business and technology. It's been lovely.
That's awesome. Tony, before I move on to you, Rebecca, there's two things that I noticed when Alicia was talking, specifically about the partnership with the government, like that the government was involved, and then the job placement. I was wondering if that was something that came from your organization or if that's helped you scale, if you could talk a little bit about that, because those partnerships are very, very important.
Well, I think what we're hearing about is the power of coaching as a key component to these programs. And so again, I wish I knew what all of you did and what brings you here today, but one of our big insights is that there's so much fear about how do you scale humans, and only technology solutions can scale, and we can't scale the coaching component, but that's what we've built our entire organization around. How do you scale really high quality coaching so that the same experience that you had, we're now delivering for thousands of people across the country on a path to tens and hundreds of thousands, while figuring out, what are the right ratios? What do the sports coaches need to do their best work? So that's continued even as we've grown from 20-person pilots to 15,000 folks. And in terms of the funding, I think that's what we're excited to talk more about today. But again, there's this myth that these programs need to be entirely free and philanthropically subsidized, or entirely expensive and paid for by an individual learner in order to scale. And we're constantly thinking about how do you mix innovative financing with philanthropy, with public subsidy to build these scalable pathways. We've got partners from our financing partner, Ascent, in the back here, and I think that could be a great conversation to dive into.
Awesome. Tony, so you want to talk a little bit about how you found Merit America and how it fits into your portfolio?
I'd be happy to. Yep, test. Again, my name is Tony Emerson Zatina, and I work for a family fund based here in San Francisco called Crankstart. One of our North Star goals is around economic mobility, specifically for low-wage workers in San Francisco and across the Bay Area. So nearly a year ago, it was exactly a year ago. A year ago, our board chair, his name is Michael Moritz. Some of you may be familiar with him. He's a longtime investor at Sequoia Capital. Was attending a dinner to learn more about Merit America with a friend of his, Len Baker. And Michael introduced the founders, Rebecca and Connor, to me after the event with the direction, these two seem interesting. Why don't you have a chat with them and see what they're talking about? But I'll trust you ultimately with regard to the direction that we go. So I met with them. Optimistically, but skeptically, as I think a good funder would. And to be frank with you, I was wowed. The experiences that they bring, they have government experience, they have big McKinsey brains, but more important than either of those things, they come with a passion, and I'll let them speak. Well, and I'm speaking about Connor, he's sitting right here. So you all know, I'm sure welcome to chat with him afterwards, but Rebecca being on the panel, I would encourage you to chat a bit about your personal story in terms of what brings you to this work, but the leadership was clearly in place. But on top of that, I think we were really impressed with the model. I've worked in economic mobility and K-12 education through much of my career, and so I've learned a few things about what it takes to support young people or working age adults to experience opportunity. One of those things is flexibility. You have to have flexibility within the program so that folks, especially working age adults who may have families, who may have other responsibilities, have the opportunity to actually succeed in the program. If it's a 9-to-5 program and they have a full-time job, it's just categorically out for them. But that's not at all the model that Merit America has. I would also say the coaching that Rebecca just spoke to is transformative. As a former coach and teacher myself, the one-to-one support is just critical. And then the results, and I'm sure you can speak more to Merit America's results than I can, but we spoke with a researcher who's out at the University of Virginia who, by nature of being a researcher, is incredibly skeptical, and yet in that call, he was incredibly excited about the impact that Merit America was making as a result of the research that he'd done. So I would say the research, the outcomes, like I just mentioned, the amazing leadership, and the model itself was really interesting to us. And so
awesome. Yeah, I want to focus on the different financing models and the social capital part. I had a question for you, Tony. Two of the portfolios that you have. One is around education, one is around economic mobility. And I'm curious how those two things intersect with each other. A lot of what we see in terms of like reporting on a lot of these economic mobility issues, it becomes a lot about wage earners, becomes about college education, becomes a lot about different types of poverty and like poverty deserts all across the U.S. and where things are located. So specifically the rural-urban divide. So I was just curious how you actually set up your portfolios.
Well, by design, there's a lot of overlap between our post-secondary success portfolio and our workforce portfolio. Although our post-secondary, it's an imperfect divide, I'll just be honest about that. Our post-secondary portfolio, because it's focused on what you might call traditional education, is more or less focused on organizations helping students, whether, again, young people or working-age adults, get to and through a 4-year degree. Our workforce portfolio is much more focused on training programs that may or may not come with a credential, but it's much more laser-focused on a job. I would say the North Star for both are family-sustaining wages for the individuals and really for the communities that are represented by the people who participate.
Great. Rebecca, going back to what you were saying about different financing options, I was wondering if you could talk about, like, this is 7 years in, what has worked, what hasn't worked, what are you hoping to see? Like, what are you thinking that the next step could be in terms of financing?
So stepping back, again, a decade ago, I remember being in a class in business school not far from here with a billionaire, a well-known American billionaire who was thinking about his philanthropy and what he could do to make a meaningful difference in the world. And his hypothesis was philanthropy should exist to catalyze things that ultimately can be sustained by the private markets or government at scale. And what's really neat in the work that we've done is we're proving out a model that can go both of those ways for the long-term sustainability. And I say that because I think so many of us here, we know that these solutions exist. We know that there are real problems and real actors that are solving them every day in meaningful ways. But the question is, how do you take those solutions to scale? And for us, from the very beginning, thinking about philanthropy as a catalyst to prove a model that could be sustained in the long term by either of those mechanisms was really important. So what we've done at Merit America is we created pretty much the opposite of how higher education is funded in our country to be the most learner-friendly financing option. To say, what if you had a program where you pay nothing up front, as opposed to higher ed where you pay everything up front? What if you only pay if you have a successful outcome? What if when you pay, it's a low monthly amount with a low total cap? And there are all these protections that if ever you can't pay for any reason, then you can put payments on pause. And so that's what we've developed in general. We can go into the details of how it works. But what we're seeing is with that mechanism, we can recoup enough of our variable costs for serving learners that we have a real mechanism for scale, coupled with proving out a pathway where Title IV funding and the hundreds of billions of dollars we spend on education and workforce in this country could eventually be allocated to help programs like this scale. So I think the one thing I'm hearing from all of us that I want to emphasize is there's so many issue areas where we think in very binary ways, where it's totally free programs or totally paid by the consumer, where it's totally online or only intensive, not scalable in person. And for us, realizing the nuance and how you can mix different elements together has been a key to success that we've learned a lot from.
Across all three of you, in terms of working with governments and working with private corporations, Zenify, and all these things, how do you establish those partnerships, or do you sort of stay where you are and then they establish it themselves? I'm curious if you work on that level as well.
Okay. So can you repeat your question?
Sure. So how do you work with governments? How do you work with the private sector and governments? You're coming from a philanthropy. You're coming from a nonprofit background. How do you work across sector?
Well,
because I'm seeing, and even in her story itself, she mentions governments. She mentions the corporations. How did they come in?
Yeah, I mean, I can share with you about how we think about government, and sometimes we partner. But in as much as I'm very blessed to be able to support a lot of resources getting out into the community at Crankstart. We're a drop in the bucket compared with public resources. And so I think for us, when it comes to programs like Merit America, it's an incredible idea. Well, that's more than an idea. It's a concept that's been proven time and again, but still relatively early stage, you might say. And so what I think would be lovely to see is to have government acknowledge that, and as Rebecca was just explaining, step up through more funding. So we are excited to have a multi-year partnership with Merit America for the time being. In the long term, could the government step up, again, like I just mentioned, to be the long-term sustainer? I would hope so. So that's certainly one way that we hope to work with government.
And then what about the private part, the placement and things like the actual corporate, the job placements and stuff? How does that work with your workflow?
Well, one thing that we've learned is if you want to help folks get into new jobs at scale, so you're working with amazing talent who are left behind by a system that was not really set up to help you succeed, what you need to do is move from these one-off partnerships to just really deeply understanding what are employers looking for across the board. How can we equip folks to be successful in a job search, knowing that with the proliferation of these applicant tracking systems, you need to apply to 100 jobs usually to get 3 interviews, to get 1 offer. And so much of what we do is just helping folks stick with a process that we know will result in success versus, I think, these somewhat outdated education and workforce models of you go through your program and we have a job waiting for you, which in many ways is actually pretty paternalistic, that we're going to pick the job for you and it's at this company, which might not be a culture fit, which might not be a good commute, which might not be the benefits you're looking for. And so our work is how do we have education programs that empower people with choices and skills, not just for their first job, but to build a career after.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Alicia, you're just a remarkable person. It's very obvious. Like, I think all of us are like, yeah, she's incredible. I'm curious, like, how some of the challenges that you feel like people have faced. And I know you talked about COVID, talked about the unemployment, but the way that you made your trajectory seem outside of the competition was very clear. I was wondering what you feel like, what might be some like limitations around scale.
Are we talking about, pre-entering merit or, post you
Well, with
landed
economic
your first
mobility
job?
in general, I think we all know that this is one of the most important issues in the U.S. today, like hands down, especially with the state of like debt and stuff, what's going on with colleges and education, and also a huge political divide. And so I think that we all recognize the importance of it, and it feels like the solution feels very straightforward. I'm wondering, what are the limitations to scale? Like, why aren't we doing this already?
And also, why not college? So, yeah.
Yeah, my grandfather, he passed away during COVID. He was a computer technician for Lockheed Martin, and he would do flashcards with my brother and I every single night. He was adamant on us going to college and really drove that home. He had big dreams for me, and unfortunately, college just didn't work for me. He passed away during COVID, and it was really hard on me to know that he wouldn't see me achieve my dream. But I think about it, and I don't think that everybody's dream looks the same. I had my kids very young, and I was focused on, creating stability and keeping a roof over our head. And there were times that we would use the food bank. And I had no qualms about doing that because I knew I needed to do what it took to provide for my children. But putting my dreams front and center for my career and my potential, it just didn't seem like the priority. And so I think that prioritizing, yourself is hard to do when you're not instilled with confidence. You don't think that that's possible without a traditional college experience. There are so many different setbacks that I see, not just within myself, but within my family and my community. And, anything from prison reform, like people that are coming out of prison, to people that, high school graduates that maybe don't want to go to college, or maybe it's the 30-year-old mom that has put her dreams on the back burner and wants to do something for herself. There are so many different challenges that Americans face. I think that it's hard to say what works for everybody, but merit offers the flexibility to help tackle all of that.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm going to start fielding questions, but keep writing them in, and I'll take them as they come. So I think I'd actually love to hear each one of you speak on this because you will have 3 very different perspectives. What are the latest labor market trends that you're thinking about that will impact economic mobility?
Can I just say AI and just leave it at that? No, I can't do that. Well, I don't necessarily perceive myself to be a pro on what the future of AI is, what the impact that it's going to have on the labor force. I'm sure many of you here this week are thinking about that and talking about that. It is very much so. What I can say is, I've been reading and listening to both public data from, for instance, the Economic Development Department in California, and some of the most renowned researchers when it comes to projecting labor trends out of McKinsey, et cetera. There's certainly a focus on jobs that are automation-proof, healthcare jobs, education jobs, many STEM jobs, which I think is surprising. I think that there are clear trends in that regard.
For me, it would just be instilling the confidence and driving home how important it is for people like myself and others to seek out opportunities to develop technology that benefits themselves, their families, and their communities. I think that's really important. And also not to shy away from things like AI. I hear a lot of things like it's going to take our jobs, but I like to, argue that and say it's creating tools for you to do your job efficiently and recommend products and solutions to your customers that work for them. So it's actually making your job easier and creating jobs. But just giving that knowledge is really important as well.
Yeah, I mean, that goes back to what Rebecca was saying about the binary. I think AI has fallen into that trap where it's like you either into it or not into it. But the reality is it's here, and, it's just like everything else. Rebecca?
Last night at a dinner, Tony and his organization hosted, someone said, I genuinely don't know what to tell my 13-year-old to learn today to be successful in life and to build a career. And I said, well, I have a 4-year-old, so I can opine on all of this. And I think the biggest skill that we think about is learning how to learn, because the only constant is the dynamism that we're seeing now that is only going to increase. And so it's something we're really proud of is we literally include the course Learning How to Learn in a lot of our programs. And our goal is to set you up not for that first job, but for a career where, you've already had a major job change, right? And I think it was probably scary the first time the Zenify post-Zenify job search started, but you were able to work with the tools that you had to get an even higher paying career after. And so how do we set folks up to be as dynamic as the labor market that they're entering?
Yeah, I think that's important to touch on. I'm no longer with Zenify. After my 4-year project ended, I was laid off with my entire team. And approaching that job loss felt so different from the first time around during COVID. I now had proven skills that I could bring to any company that I decided was a correct fit for myself. In that first job search, I was like, I'll take anything. I just want to get my foot in the door. But now I'm a senior business analyst, and I'm learning every day. And that imposter syndrome is still, deep rooted inside me. But I can, move past that, knowing that I am where I'm meant to be, and I have the skills that I learned from Merit America to be able to do my job and do it well.
Yeah, I think that imposter syndrome is also humility, and I think all good leaders have that. So I think this relates to what you're just saying about your experience. How are we accounting for what feels like regular seismic shifts in the job sector? Industries changing, dying, being created, and cultural changes around hire and fire, which obviously we've seen so much more in the last few years than before.
I think we all touched on that a little bit, but I think the biggest thing I'll say there is just how do we continue to take a hard look at what we're doing and whether it's relevant? One thing we're really proud of at Merit is we offer career tracks, and we are constantly looking, are these tracks actually the best jobs available for folks? We had a track we've offered for 5 years that was candidly bringing in meaningful revenue to our company, but we started to see a dip in the data that folks were taking longer to get jobs, the jobs weren't paying as well, and when we coupled the data we had with labor market data, with anecdotal data, we heard that skill set, it was a Java development program, wasn't enough anymore, and that people wanted full stack developers or nothing at all. And so we sunset the program and said, so many folks are so focused on the inputs. What are we offering? What are we doing? What have we done before? Instead of really reevaluating what is the mission. And our mission is to get folks from low-wage work into upwardly mobile careers as efficiently and effectively as possible. And if that means constant reinvention, then that's what we'll have to do.
Can you talk a little bit about how the coaching actually works from both of your perspectives?
Yeah, I can speak on that. It was a long time ago, but my coach would get on with us like a stand-up style call, and we would tackle the course that we had completed the night before, and then we would get into breakout rooms and focus on career development as well. It was really well-rounded what we learned, but we also utilized each other and studied together. So I mean, my coach would meet one-on-one with each of us and talk about what we wanted for our careers, what we were interested in learning, and really help us get a job that was a good fit for us.
Do you want to add to that, Rebecca?
I think just noting that we believe a lot in the power of coaching, and the word coaching is used very broadly. So we've heard folks be like, oh yeah, we offer coaching. We've got one coach who works with 1,000 people at a time. It's like, that is not actually coaching. That is a call center. And so what we really focus on is how do you have the right ratios and tools to enable that interaction, which is something we're betting on not being replaced by AI anytime soon. A person-to-person interaction of where are you trying to go, what is standing in your way, and how can I walk alongside you and help remove those barriers.
And Tony, a question for you. You mentioned a focus on family-sustaining wages as an outcome. How do you choose your areas to support to meet that outcome? And how do you track it?
Yes. First of all, on family-sustaining wages, it's a difficult metric to calculate. Depending on the urban area you live in, you'll have a different area of median income, and then there are researchers nationally who are looking at this who have different figures. So I'm glad you didn't ask what is the family-sustaining wage here, because it's a complicated response. But in terms of the question is really about selecting what careers lead to them. That's the question?
The question is, how are you tracking that? How are you supporting that happening?
I think the biggest focus for us has been, and I can speak to other projects that we're supporting in addition to Merit America, is the careers that end up being family sustaining are the ones that provide some sort of a progressive pathway. It's very rare, especially for folks who are coming in to employment through a training program, to experience uplift if the first job they get is the only job that they get. They need to have access to additional training and support so that they can continue to rise in their career. So that's one of the must-haves for us. We look at wage data. We look at the likelihood of wage data going up for a given career path. Again, I've looked extensively at job outlooks for the coming years, but I really think of progressive pathways, whether it's education or healthcare or STEM engineering careers, is the focus.
Thank you. Does Merit America believe that employers have interest or will pay for job placement by Merit's program?
So we've had employers who pay to hire our talent, but we actually recently sunset that business to the idea of you have to constantly look at what's working and what's not and what will work at scale. And we did that for two reasons. One, it just requires a really long sales cycle and significant account management to meet the various needs of Fortune 500 employers. And the second is we learned it wasn't actually the most mission aligned, because we had an example where we had an employer that was paying us a significant finder's fee for all of the talent we sent there. And it turned out that their jobs weren't the best jobs. And our learners were coming to us saying, hey, I know you helped me line up this seemingly great job, but I got a better offer somewhere else at a company I'm more excited about. Is it okay if I take that one instead? And so the models that are employer funded, that are scaling, are really essentially staffing firm models, some of which have sort of predatory practices on the recruitment and placement side. And so what we believe is employers can have skin in the game in a lot of ways, but what we look for are employers who are committed to offering those jobs that pay a living wage and that have real upwardly mobile career pathways. And we believe, again, that you can finance these programs through a combination of personal financing for the learners who start out making $25,000, and on average, we've seen are making $50,000 3 or more months after our program, and public funding to take it to scale.
Yeah, so a question around public funding, but if any of you have more questions, you can also just raise your hand and then they'll come around. Thank you, and bring them to me. With the growing need for local, state, and federal workforces, do you have plans to expand outside of tech and potentially target skills needed for civil service, potentially as a way to attract government money as well?
feel like I'm talking a lot, but again, we're really focused on what are those great jobs, and we are not in any way limited to tech. We're actually launching later this month, announcing our semiconductor manufacturing technician track. We're looking at climate-related tracks, healthcare tracks, and ultimately, again, it's not about Merit America. It's about all of us working on economic mobility and education. How do we stay attuned to where are there those opportunities in the workforce where there's real need for talent, but not yet enough supply, and that's where the opportunity arbitrage exists.
Because your question hit on federal funding, can I
Please. I
riff
think
off
that was
that a little bit?
definitely an idea that they were having about
Great.
how do you attract federal funds, which is what I was getting to earlier about government partnerships.
Awesome. Okay, so a bit of personal history for me. I'm a Pell Grant recipient. Without the Pell Grant program, I would not have been a college graduate, and my life would be very different today. I'm not saying it wouldn't be a good life, but so many of my opportunities are because of college. And you know, I had my government subsidy. At the time, I think it was $6,400 a year, and I could take that to any one of over 1,000 nonprofit accredited colleges or universities across the country. I decided to go to Gonzaga. Any Zags out there? No? Okay, well, go Zags. But the point is that I got to choose where I wanted to go. I did the research and determined it was the right fit for me. I appreciate that sort of agency around a government program like that. If you compare that with the great majority of workforce funding, it tends to go directly to programs. And make no mistake, we support many workforce programs that we believe in. They're getting amazing results and they have great models. At the same time, what does it mean for the government to sort of bet on individuals to go to their four-year college of choice, but not bet on individuals who want to go to a training program of their choice? That feels elitist to me. I don't know if that's sort of, hopefully that's the right amount of spice for our conversation today. But you know, there's a bill right now that's being considered in Congress. It's a bipartisan bill. It's actually called the Bipartisan Workforce Pell Act. I recently spoke with an aide from Congresswoman Virginia Fox's office. She's out of North Carolina. She's a Republican. And we talked a bit about her sponsorship of the bill. They're really excited about it. I'm setting up time with the main Democratic sponsor, Bobby Scott, I believe, out of Virginia. Anyway, I would love to see something like that pass. It would acknowledge the elitism that I just spoke to, so that individuals can choose, vote with their feet, so to speak, and take their subsidy to wherever they want to go. I think many will go to a program like Merit America. Many will go to Merit America. But that's the sort of federal change I would love to see. I think states could replicate something really similar.
And just building on that, what we'd love to see is how does that funding, that massive hundreds of billions of dollars in annual government funding, go to a focus on outcomes and not inputs? So instead of saying you can only go to these programs, but by the way, we're not going to audit the outcomes at all, to saying, hey, you have a wide range of programs as long as they're delivering a social return on investment. I recently saw a report that half of the 4,000 colleges in America, yes, there are 4,000 colleges, if you attend, you will be no better off 10 years later than if you had not attended at all. And yet those are getting billions and billions of dollars in government funding, whereas programs that are reliably delivering outcomes often are boxed out because of their exact structure.
My brother is a Bruin, so I can't cheer about Gonzaga, not here. But we can talk about that later. Rebecca, do you have any partnerships with higher education institutions, or do you see the college system as static?
We do have partnerships. Actually, that semiconductor manufacturing track is going to be partnering with a community college that has a great curriculum. But so far, they put about 75 to 100 people through it every year, in person, full time. And so by partnering with them, we're able to say, how do we make this program work for people who are not able to do a full-time learning experience, who might not live exactly where the community college is, but who are still looking for that pathway to upward mobility and interested in that career.
More questions about the coaches. Where did they come from, and did they come from through partners?
Yeah, that's very tactical. We can talk more about it, but we recruit them from the best coaching talent across the country. I like the rapid fire. But yeah.
How important is emotional intelligence for people trying to move into higher paying jobs? You spoke a lot about that in your conversation, and obviously you have a very high EQ as well. Just in terms of solutions to actually coach people for that, I would love to know that information.
Can you repeat? I'm so sorry.
Sure. So how important is emotional intelligence for people trying to move into higher paying jobs? And what have you noticed as good solutions for that?
Emotional intelligence? I can only speak on myself. I think it's critical. I think it brings a huge part of why I'm great for the job that I do in managing all of those emotions and communication styles. I pick up really easily on people that are successful in their roles and kind of emulate what they do, and in reverse, know what I don't want to do. So just being really quick on what you should do, what you shouldn't do, and I don't think I understand the question fully, but it was important for me to be emotionally intelligent to navigate through a world that I felt wasn't like I wasn't supposed to be there, and so to navigate that is hard, on a daily basis, working with clients and putting my best self forward, even on days that are not my best. But I do it, and I do it really well, and that's what I'm most proud of.
Can I ask a question of the audience? Raise your hand if you've hired someone in the last year. Okay, look at this. Look at all these hiring managers. Raise your hand if you required a college degree for the role you hired for. Are we being honest? Are we being honest? So yeah, a lot of folks. What we always talk about is when you require a college degree for roles that don't necessarily need a college degree, you are boxing out 50 million Americans who aren't just in need of opportunity, but they're incredibly hardworking, incredibly talented. At our organization, we've hired dozens of our alumni into our organization, and they have some of the highest EQ, highest performers we have on the whole team. And so one of the takeaways we'd love to be is this works not when employers pay nonprofits a finder's fee, but when employers shift their mindset to realizing that talent is everywhere, opportunity is not, and we all have a role to play in how we are correcting for these systemic injustices.
Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, is it okay if I talk about another partner of ours? Okay.
Yes, of
okay.
course.
Good. You're not going to resent me. So we began a grant partnership with an organization in Chicago earlier this year called National Louis University, NLU. NLU has a 3-year degree-based apprenticeship program focused on several technical careers, one of which is medical assisting. And after they did their first pilot, they got feedback from the local hospital systems that they were placing their apprentices at. They were expecting, based on what students had been talking about, they were expecting to get a lot of feedback about, the students are great, but they need to be bringing in a much deeper technical skill set. That's not what they heard. What they heard was the students are great. Technically, they're good enough, and we're continuing to. But what we want you to double down on is emotional intelligence. We want you to double down on what it takes to be a collaborative teammate, to be a manager for those who want to go on the management track. And so, they were getting real-time feedback that it's just as important. And they were candid that the apprentices that they felt like were most likely to get a full-time offer after the program were the ones who, were bringing in the collaboration skills or were demonstrating a commitment to becoming the professional that the hospital systems wanted. So it's incredibly important.
That's fascinating. Thank you. How much do you think it costs to prepare someone for a quality career if they're not relying on the traditional college model? Like, what would that need to include? And I think costs, I don't think they meant directly quantifiable, but like, what does that mean? What do they need to have if they're not going to go to college?
It's really hard for me to generalize that, but I think all three of us and many in the room could speak to the barriers that many folks face. I don't want to start there, because if a person has aspiration, and every person does, then I think coming at it from an asset-based frame of this person wants to experience uplift, that is the asset they're bringing into this, and they can achieve what they want with that in mind. But I think that there are certainly barriers to consider, and I think Rebecca has spoken to the incredibly important one-to-one coaching. A lot of that is academic. Some of that is personal as well, I know. From a funder perspective, we've really begun to talk more about what does it look like for more dollars to flow directly to the individual to be addressing the basic needs that they're experiencing while they're in the program. A lot of the dollars are going directly to the programs, which makes sense, to manage the staff and to support the success of the program itself. But individuals have needs, and especially if they're taking time off from work to participate in the program, those have to be addressed. And so I think more dollars directly to people is partly what it will take. And that's something I think I've really learned in the last year, having spoken with quite a few of our workforce partners about that.
Interesting. Do either of you want to jump in on that too?
I think again, it's not binary. There's not one cost number we're targeting. What we would love to see, our vision is a decade from now, no matter where you are, if you want to advance your education and your career in life, you have easy ways to understand which of the massive number of options are going to deliver you the return you're looking for in the time frame and with the cost you're looking for. So whether you want a short-term certificate or an associate's degree or a college degree or a graduate degree, that you can see, because the data is there, what will it take me in terms of time and money realistically, and what can I expect 1, 3, 5, 10 years after as a result of this program? And ideally, once we have that transparency, having the massive amount of public and private funding flowing to those high-quality social ROI programs and away from those that aren't delivering a return.
So what happens next? Where do we go now? You just reached 7 years this year, right?
Yes.
So what's the next 7 years?
Well, I think with Merit, we're on a path to reaching 100,000 people annually with our model, while also helping to direct the millions of individuals who are looking for career changes and education every year to those high ROI options. So how do we change a system overall to focus on outcomes versus inputs, to create pathways for people who have been systemically left behind, while also creating an option at scale for a huge number that are currently being failed?
I think, for us, we're excited to be in partnership with Merit America for a number of years, and so learning alongside you and supporting where we can. Again, Crankstart is all in on the success of San Francisco as a city, and so much of my time is focused on economic mobility efforts here. So for anybody in the room, I know SOCAP is international, so not everybody is necessarily based here, but for anybody who is, and who is very committed to continuing to support this city, and its comeback, would love to chat with you. Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
For me, it's just spreading the word, not just to people that are interested in funding the program, but to people that don't know about the program and don't know that there is an alternative path to college. And speaking to more people in my community about, alternate paths other than college would be.
I think we can move to last statements unless I don't have any more explicit questions unless people have other stuff that they want to ask. But I did want to sort of address what you were just getting at with the Bay and about how that, the economic mobility question is also a housing question. It also becomes a question of food deserts. It quickly becomes a question of poverty and health. And I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the intersections of these things in your work.
At Crankstart?
Yeah.
Oh. Well, I have several colleagues who are leading our housing work and leading our democracy work, which I think is also intertwined. Big question. What I would say is, we're actively interested in collaborating across nonprofits and government towards, much bigger swings, bigger visions for what it will take. I think that the case sometimes is strong for an individual organization with a model to support people to do that effectively is there. I also think there are times when the case is actually you need a constellation of organizations to come together to provide this service, advocate for this change, an initiative, if you will. We consider all of the above. The great majority of our funding stays here in the Bay, and within that, the majority is here in San Francisco. So, we have many grantees who are focused on individual programs and others who are focused on cross-cutting initiatives. So both and for us.
Yeah, I feel like whenever we go to investigating what's happening in the global south around climate or health, we see that constellation very clear. We see where the aids and the governments and stuff. And I feel like the minute we move into bringing the dollars domestically, we tend to focus on organizational things. And I feel like some of the economic mobility stuff, and I love how your portfolios are also touching democracy. And I feel like there's so much intersection that we can really get to. And this goes back to what you were saying about health and how that affected and about food. And I think that, especially in areas like San Francisco, where it's also a housing concern, a lot of our economic mobility work was around housing as well, that we did at the Journalism Network. So I don't know if there's anything you both want to say to that or to close out. You have any closing remarks?
Well, I was just rereading the title of the panel. I probably should have done that before we sat down, but Reimagining Capital. Like, quick show of hands, who here works in some way on the investing side, the philanthropy side, the public funding side? Raise your hand. So look at this. So this is the capital in this room. We believe the capital is there. We just have to be more innovative in how we apply it to solve these big problems. So happy to talk more about how we think philanthropy can catalyze these models, how we think impact investing and financing can bring them to scale, and how we think governments can ultimately play a role in aligning funding towards the outcomes and the models that are driving results versus the input. So I think that's the thing I'll leave us with. I was in an Uber ride just yesterday, actually, and had a funder partner who was grilling us in the early diligence stage, and saying, well, why do your programs have a fee, and why do you have this financing model? And I was going through all of the learner protections and why it's important to take it to scale. And I get off the call, and the Uber driver said, can you actually tell me more about that? That sounds incredible. You have a program where we pay nothing up front, only pay if we're successful. The total is $5,000, and there are all these protections. And again, I think there's this binary thinking that nonprofits that are trying to do good should be free, and we should just, really have no path to long-term sustainability. But the funding is there if we can get creative on how to unlock it to solve these problems.
I would agree with everything that Rebecca just said. The only piece that I would add on to is the relationship between private capital and government capital. And again, I mentioned earlier, we're working really hard to engage legislators to ask them, what will it take for a program like Merit America's to sort of shine a light on the value of something like short-term Pell, which again is the act that's currently being discussed in Congress. So we're working hard on that. I know many of you work in that space too, so I would encourage you to continue to do so.
That's really great. Yeah, I mean, so many of these public goods are not being delivered at scale as well, and I think that's great that you're doing that as funders as well and showcasing, like, look what could happen if, with the scale. I'm going to close it off with you, so you're going to have to do the last remarks.
I mean, it's really hard to relay my story and my struggles that I've been through, but I just want to leave you guys with this. There are so many people like me and that are not like me and that have their own unique struggles that you couldn't even fathom. So the need is there. People need alternate paths to college, just plain and simple. It's just how we make that happen. For me, it was Merit America. It's completely changed my life, my outlook on my career, and how I parent my children. I have a 13-year-old daughter. She goes to a school that specializes in bridging the gap between Black and Mexican communities and going to college. And I still firmly instill those beliefs, that my grandpa instilled in me to her and Will, my son, around that time. But I also want to create a future where they don't necessarily need to go to college if they don't want to, if it doesn't work for them, and still have a life that they can be proud of. So that's why I'm here today, spreading that. And there are so many people that need programs like Merit America.